public workshop up Thursday, September 14th, 2023. If you will stand with us, the mayor is going to lead us in a prayer and pledge.
Lord, thanks once again for the city that we live in and the people that are here, our staff and all. This week we celebrated over 3,000 lives that because of the freedoms that we have had suffered and are no longer with us. We ask that you watch over those that have been affected by that incident and those that are still being affected by that incident. And we hold their families, their friends, and their neighbors in our prayers. We ask that you watch over us all in everything we do in your name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kathy, will you call the roll, please?
Nancy.
Here.
Bishop.
Here.
Avery.
Here.
Mendel.
Here.
Stewart.
Here.
Carlisle.
Here. Okay, we're going to discuss stuff up here, and after we're through, we will invite the public to speak. If you want to say something, you get 3 minutes. Right, 3 minutes. Okay. The background, the city, other than permitting special events, which may be one-time events, recurrent events, does not have a comprehensive regulation for the use of city parks by commercial business. And the purpose of this workshop is to determine if the city wishes to regulate commercial activities in city parks. Mayor?
All right, this is, we will have open discussion after we kind of go through our agenda, just to kind of set the tone as far as, you know, if the city council, and I'm going to kind of ask the city council to nod one way or the other, if you want to consider regulations for city parks. If you say, no, we want to stay where we're at, well, then this meeting's going to be really short. So, but you guys want to look at regulating city parks, commercial businesses?
Yes.
So much, so pretty much the consensus. Okay, that's what I
No.
figured it was.
No.
Okay, it was 4-1, so you lose.
I know.
So, okay.
I knew that.
So we just, there's several topics that have come up, and we have bits and pieces through our ordinances that address different sections in that stuff, but kind of don't pull it all together. And there's also some, I don't want to say holes in it, but as we grow and continue, there's more and more people coming here. We're finding with our ordinances that they worked in the past and may not work now, or need tweaking, or need additions to it. And this is one of them that we're seeing more type businesses coming to our city parks, coming to our parking lots, setting up little booths, setting up food trucks, setting up other stuff, and we really don't have any kind of regulation on that. So this is kind of what spurred a lot of this that we're seeing, the other businesses that are using public property for private use and not having any kind of agreement, not having any kind of regulations. Before it gets out of hand where we may have one food truck and then we have 30 food trucks. Then what do we do? So this is kind of where this is setting the tone to go forward. And what we'll do is tonight we'll have a discussion just on the basics, and you'll see kind of an outline that we put together. A couple of the administration and the attorney and myself and the councilman kind of put these together, going through some research that we did to find some basic points. And what will happen from here is that we will get with Central Florida Regional Planning Council to take our ideas, if you have ideas, to kind of melt all of them together to get an ordinance, which then comes back to the public. There is no, we cannot make a decision at a workshop, a final decision. There's no motion to be made. It's all discussion, and that's what a workshop is so the council, by law, cannot speak to each other outside of a public meeting. So it does become difficult to say, 2 of them are like this, 3 of them wouldn't like this, 1 or 4 or something, but they can't talk to each other until they get to a city council meeting. So that's kind of where we're starting. We have several workshops, and that's where this one is coming in. So I'll kind of get right into it, and since there is a consensus to go, here's some bullet points to say, okay, do we want to look at leases? Would that be a consideration to say, okay, are we going to lease parts of the property? Are we going to do temporary leases? Any ideas? Would you consider looking at something on that angle, or do we want to stay away from leasing and go to like permitting or concessionaire issues? So
I think permitting, to me, makes more sense, especially because, if we're talking about food trucks or something like that. I don't know that they're going to want to lease for the whole time, or if that makes sense for that business model. Personally, I like the idea of permitting better.
I think permitting would be the bulk of all the businesses, but I think for the larger businesses,
Sure.
we probably want some type of business.
Okay.
Are you talking leasing parcels since it's parks and recreation, parcels in our parks? As
Yeah,
a long-term lease, as a short-term lease?
I'd be open to that lease, and I think nothing should be long-term. Because I don't want to, first off, I think we need to encourage growth in the businesses in Sebring, but I think we also need to protect the people who live here too, that we don't want to see the public spaces get taken over by businesses. I don't think it'd be good to offer that long-term to really anybody.
I mean, to go with that, I think a cap on the number of, if we're permitting for food trucks or something, you shouldn't be permitting for 40 in one weekend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Some numbers so that it's still usable by the public, and we're not overwhelming our parks with commercial ventures.
And I think we limit the leases too, that we don't want to provide,
Right.
I don't think it's going to have multiple of the same vendor in certain situations and circumstances.
So how would you decide if someone needs a permit versus a lease?
I think it's just,
Type of business.
yeah, type of business, and you look at the individual.
How
With
long of a lease?
A year? Does that make sense?
My concern is our parks are paid for by the citizens of Sebring.
Well, these businesses are serving the citizens.
Some of them. Well, they're serving, but the parks are for everybody to use. I would be okay with permitting, because permitting is real short term, like for a weekend. But I don't like the lease idea at all.
Well, but to Harrison's point, it depends on the business. Like, for
I
example,
understand
a boat rental.
I understand that,
You
but
shouldn't be
what
having
we're
to
talking
permit
about,
day by day.
leasing a piece of property that the citizens have paid for years to maintain, and then we're gonna lease it, and they're told, you can't come on here because I have a lease.
I think we can arrange it in a better way where we're not saying, you get half of this park. I think it's leasing the use to do commercial transactions in the park, because that's how I would view it. Maybe it could include some space, but it doesn't have to.
Any comments, Terry, or any thoughts?
Well, it's kind of a thorny thing. I've been trying to listen and figure it out. I certainly think it's a wonderful service to the people, and the little bit I've looked at gone out there and observed at the Veterans Beach, I've been very impressed with the quality of the watercraft and the professionalism out there. And but it is, Leonard, I understand what you're saying. That's going to be used in parking at Veterans Beach and different things. And so I was wanting to come and just hear kind of what everybody else said. I did hear someone at some point, maybe in trying to learn a little bit more about this, but the possibility of leasing, half of that little park off to the side with a tree, I don't know what's the best way to
I
go
think,
here.
Terry, the discussion that we'd like to have at this point in time is kind of a high-level discussion. Is that something we want to entertain, is leasing property, and not specifically to that individual at this point in time? This is more, what do we do on an
Citywide.
overall basis, citywide basis?
And not just necessarily Veterans Beach,
Right.
but any,
All of them.
yeah.
City Pier Beach,
Well,
we got
Mayor, what
people
do
that
you
show up on.
think?
And I think we got to be careful about how much, if we get into a lease agreement, how much we lease, the term on it. If it boils over to the rest of the parks, if it boils over to the parking lots, that restricts the use. We don't have a large parks in Sebring. Veterans Beach is not a large park. Charlie Brown's not a large park. You got City Pier Beach is probably our bigger park. If we redo that one, there may be some possibilities of more of that usage in a lease. I think to me, a permitting is a preferable way, because, and you can set up, it's almost like a lease to say the permit has these conditions, that you can use this part of the park for this period of time. It may be a day, and it may be a year. So, I mean, that's the kind of the next step if we want to get into permitting. But what that also does is I think it controls some of it more. You have the other options of, you have, and I'm going to go back to the food truck because it's an easier one to talk about, that if you have, the taco guy comes down, he's got a permit, and then the ice cream guy comes down, you got a permit. Well, you can kind of control that to say, okay, we're only going to allow so many this way. If you get into a lease situation, I think they're both legal, but I think the lease is more, it's a different, it's not an easy decision. But I'm more in favor of a kind of a permit type thing, that the city has it, they've got the permit, and it goes from there. There'll be we'll get into this later because it's kind of on down the road in here as far as what fees you would charge and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical to us too. And also there's an accounting issue with municipalities. If they deem that we are giving somebody a for-profit business a benefit, then it becomes a taxable situation to the city. So if you give somebody I think it's a rather large benefit, I think, but it can come back to say, okay, it's also going to cost us more in taxes, that we have to pay for the taxes from an income standpoint or a benefit standpoint. So there's a couple other issues we have in there, but I think the direction, I agree that we need to, I concur with you guys and ladies that we need some sort of comprehensive city park management system, and how we handle that, so it doesn't get, as we grow and we're starting to grow faster, people are going to come from all over and say, hey, I can do this. And then the next guy says, you can do it, I can do it. And that's a situation that we've got to be very careful of. So I think we're heading in the right direction and putting something in place and looking at what we have bits and pieces already, so we can operate and change some of those. But I think we just have to kind of get some sort of plan, get it out to y'all, get it to the public, and then sit down and talk about this again and kind of think this through with them. A lot of cities, I've done a lot of research, and there's a lot of cities that have these regulations, and there's some really good ones in there, some really tight ones that are specific park by park, that this park closes at, you can't get into this park from Sunday afternoon until 7 o'clock. Monday's this. I mean, it's some, and I don't want to over-regulate what we're doing, but I think we need a plan that we have the ability to enforce in the first place. And it prevents some of the stuff that happens. And if, as we go along, if we do set something in place and we need to change it, we can always come back and look at it. So, but I think it's a good start to.
Were any of those specific to this type of business? Any of the research from other cities?
Well, there's commercial watercraft livery services that they regulate. So yes, there is some to that. So
Things like exercise classes and gatherings. I mean, did all sorts of stuff.
This is a real specialized business, and I think it is just such a worthwhile thing, in my view. I think the public would really enjoy this. And I noticed in one of these letters, one of the residents was saying that people do stop by and ask if there are any boat rentals. I just think it's such a great idea, because not everybody wants to maintain a boat or has the ability to maintain a boat. And it does look just like they just take wonderful care. The watercraft and all the different things they have out there just look so inviting and were well cared for. It looked like they were doing an excellent job. So I personally would love to see how to work with them. Maybe a permit would be the way to go. But I'm really open to whatever y'all can help me to understand some of the ramifications for the future and all.
You're talking about permitting that would be like for a long term, similar to a lease term, like you have a permit for a year, and then you reapply, you know, a month before it expires, a year, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
And those permits could look different based on the type of industry too, right? So we're gonna
Sure.
have different, maybe if there is a permitting fee, it's gonna be different for a food truck versus someone who wants to have an outdoor gym or CrossFit meeting there. So we can be pretty diverse on what
We
do
can
there.
set that up, if that's the way we want to go, we can set that in our kind of rules and regulations. That it can be, you know, the permit is not specific to say you can have a 3-day permit, and that's it. So,
Yeah, I'd be for that then.
Yeah, as long as we have the flexibility for time frames and we can do a long-term permit, yeah, I think that's fine.
Well, my concern is we already have 2 beaches in Sebring that the citizens pay to maintain, and they can't use them.
I mean, I disagree. I think they're using.
What do you
Are you
mean?
They're
talking
not
Hidden
using
Beach
them.
and Crescent Beach?
Hidden Beach and Crescent Beach, you got one parking place at
I live
Crescent
by
Beach,
Hidden Beach. They're
and you
using
can,
it.
huh?
I live right by Hidden Beach. They're using it.
But not like it. When I was a kid growing up, we used it. We could drive down there and park, and we used
They
it.
still do. They just, you know,
The gate's
park on
closed.
private property.
The gate's closed. Every time I go by, the gate's closed.
Go by there on a Saturday. There's
Saturdays are
there's
very
plenty
well
of people.
used.
it's a well-used park.
Okay.
I can't, but that's a different issue too.
I know, but
That's
it's
not-
still, I'm still talking
And
for
we
the
can-
citizens of Sebring. You know, they're paying for this stuff to be maintained. They need to be able to use it without.
I don't think any of us are saying otherwise. I mean, and if you're
But if you
concerned
permit
especially about.
somebody- When you permit somebody, that's their space.
Well, I think we can limit that too,
Right,
what that
exactly.
looks like too, that you're not taking over a huge
not
amount of
exclusive.
space.
You
Right.
could say that it's only gonna be one parking space, for instance, and not one specific parking space. It's first come, first served type basis. You could limit the number so that you didn't lose all your parking spaces to
Right.
commercial business. You've got lots of flexibility on the structure of it.
And I think we
If
should
that's
do
what you
that.
wanna go down.
You know, we don't want Veterans Beach to be a flea market every Saturday. But
And it's
No.
full, as you know, on Saturdays,
Yeah.
it's hard to find a parking spot there,
You
so.
know, especially on holiday weekends. You know, if you want to park your truck and trailer, you better get there early.
But and to your point and what the mayor said earlier, we can even go as specific as permitting for different parks, where you say we don't want vendors at Hidden Beach. Okay, no permitting, permitted there, no businesses.
That's a
that kind
good
of
point, because we don't have a multitude of parks. I think I pulled the St. Pete one, and what was there, 40-some parks?
Oh, 60,
Not more.
63?
It was-
Yeah, it was a ton. And they outlined park by park what you could do. And like, you're exactly correct, with Hidden Beach, you really don't want,
Right.
there's not enough beach there to, they pull boats up now into the swim area, which is illegal. But there's no other place to do it because that whole beach is a swim area. So you're supposed to be 200 feet off of a public property line with your boat and not be in that close. So, except for the Veterans Beach where you get to go out on the waterway there, so boat ramp. But I don't know if you all knew that too. It's a 200-foot rule off of any public piece of property. So technically, even boats on the drainage easements, you should be, the way it's written, 200 feet, which, is hard to do when you live next door to that thing. So there are some, like, little things that have to be looked at from that standpoint, but I'm kind of digressing into something else also. But, we do have the vendor permit process. One of the things you do, is it exclusive to one individual or not exclusive to one firm or one company? So that's,
I mean, my thoughts are non-exclusive, but the one thing I'm not sure about, and I'll look for some help here, is how do you do that and then also manage the number of businesses? I mean, because does that turn into an RFP? Say you're going to limit Veterans Beach to allow 3 food trucks or 2 food trucks, and you have 5 people apply for permits. Does that become an RFP at that point? Or who's making the call on who's getting a
You
permit?
can't,
or not?
well, you could have a rule that at any given time there's only 3 or 2.
Right, but I'm asking, how does that work when you have more
First come,
applicants?
first come, first
Yeah.
served.
Either that, or is there kind of scheduling that you want to book this weekend?
Okay.
Good points. Good
You can
points.
do a lottery system. I mean, if it turns out that there's significant demand,
Okay.
you could look at it that way. Maybe don't set the initial batches too long to find out what the market really is for it.
Maybe like a month or something to get a feel and then go from there if there's, okay.
And that's probably, if we go this route too, it'd be good to talk to a lot of local food trucks to see what they would like to do too, that works well for them.
Right, that's a good point.
So the permitting would be, excuse me, the more preferable, sounds like, to, as an option. And then it does sound like that's more flexible, where it could be tweaked if it needed to be and extended if it worked properly, or,
And if someone wanted to lease property from the city, they could come to you, as people have in the past, and say, here, this is what I propose, and you can deal with that on a case-by-case basis as it may come up.
I'm good, pretty much on that, permitting, and
I am.
we worked on that, we tweaked that a little bit. I did, put in here the enforcement responsibility. Who can enforce it? You know, the police, code enforcement, administration, you know, public works is in these parks all the time, so we don't have a Parks and Rec department that most of these other places have, that have the enforcement and the management of their ordinances. But Public Works is there, and it's not so much, we're gonna arrest you, it's just like, hey, I gotta see your permit. If you don't have a permit, they ask them to leave, and it's not a force issue, because somebody could say, I'm not leaving, you know, and then it's a call to the police department if that happens, but.
I think that conversation starts with which of these departments works on the weekends.
Sure.
Could you give everybody the same level of authority to enforce it, but if you're not working on the weekend, the Public Works would enforce it, that's when police would step in, but if it's during the week, then Public Works or admin has the same authority to go enforce it.
Sure.
now where does the issue of insurance and liability fall?
That's, Bob will
You
explain
could
some of
require
that.
that as a condition of someone getting the permit. They would have to have insurance of a certain minimum amount in place.
We do that anyway when they want to use.
For all special events.
And I think it should be part of the permitting process, and any legitimate business already has that.
Usually the event organizer has the insurance, but if they're permitting for themselves, then they need to have the insurance.
Well, let's go back on that real quick though. I mean, if we're going to enforce that or require that for all permits, what if you're a small gym or a food truck? I mean, maybe some small businesses don't have that insurance. If you're doing photography, I don't know, and if they still want to use the park, can we have some kind of exceptions to that?
I guess the question I would have is, end of the day, we don't want the city to be liable for something that happens from a commercial business.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't really know what that threshold is, but,
And I'd say start off with it as a requirement, and folks can tell you that it's a problem and you need to reconsider. But I would start with, if you're gonna have the process, have it
like, I don't,
as a requirement.
to your point, I don't know if like a yoga teacher would have that kind of insurance or something,
Yeah.
but I don't really know what's typical for something like that.
Some of the ordinances that I pull up was a number of person limit. It was like, if you have 5, like we have a Tai Chi class that meets down at Veterans Beach, and there's usually 3 or 4 people there. And it's kind of I don't think it might be exempt because it's not a for-profit business, it's just people that get down there and do that, so that they can use the parks. That wouldn't even come under this, because it's not a commercial business. So most of them that are in these it's a commercial business doing business in the park, and I think one of the cities must have had a problem with CrossFit, because their ordinance on CrossFit was, 2 pages? And it was specific as to how heavy the weights could be, you know, what the medicine ball could look like, you know, if you brought big ropes, what you had. I mean, it was really, so somebody in some city kind of took over a park, and that's kind of what we're trying to avoid, is to have that kind of a, but it's, I'll tell you, it's it'll be coming, you know. The bigger we get, the more abuse we're going to take, so.
And the pier, you know, is gonna be developing the pier
Mhm.
area
Right.
too. You know, I was wondering, Scott, your input on this.
So I think you've touched on a lot of the items. I question whether or not the long term would be permits as opposed to some type of lease. And then I guess I'd question or have the attorney weigh in on, you know, how you go about that solicitation, or whether that would be a permit. Because if you granted a one-year permit, the following year, is it first come, first serve? When's that period open up? So I'm thinking along the lines of, you know, you might have a solicitation like we do other things, and folks could bring forth their proposals. You could select a proposal for that year period, and then the following year you open it back up again for a solicitation, so that, you know, there would be equal opportunity, if you will. You know, when we're talking about just 1, 2, 3 day items, you can spread the wealth, so to speak, amongst different food trucks or, you know, businesses that want to utilize the parks. That'd be my input.
Well, that makes sense, because to the point previously, we were talking about a lottery system. That doesn't feel like an equitable way to decide for long-term users. You know, if we're talking about a livery service and we have more demand, I think an RFP would be appropriate for something like that. Not a lottery system or anything that would be chance or, you know, decided by one individual. Does that sound appropriate, Bob?
Mhm.
Okay.
So then, in that case, correct me if I'm wrong, then you could have a limit to one permit for a certain business, but then to apply for the permit, you have to do the RFP.
RFP.
Okay.
Yeah. Or, and I mean, you could probably do that even if you wanted to allow multiple, but if you thought it was a long-term deal where there would be demand more than, you know, than the number of spots you wanted to allow. I could say if we allowed 2 of those businesses to operate at a given location, you'd still do an RFP and just select the top 2.
Yeah, okay.
And it may be demand driven at the end of the day.
Right.
We may not have.
Yeah, it's going to be
lots of
academic,
folks.
right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, 10 years ago we did it and we had 1 applicant.
Right.
But times are changing,
That they are.
and I think it's wise to have this workshop and try to figure out how to do it. I look on this business as I have said it before, a wonderful service. I think people really want that. And I was looking at one of these letters talking about some of the things they've had in the past, you know, on our lake. And those things could be coming, and to see how to manage it and keep it safe. And
Terry, just for informational purposes, Terry's referencing 2 emails that were received by City Council. That's all we had concerning the situation, were 2 emails directly for this workshop, so. And she's referencing one that was pro sports in the lake, and one that was not pro. They were con, so, against it, so. Activities. We talked about, just moving on, unless you guys have some more discussion on this point, and several of them do use different, they have leases and they have permits and they have vendor permits, they have merchandise permits. I mean, they do a combination of that, and we can kind of look into that if we get a little deeper and put together, once we get with Central Florida Regional Planning Council, they've got a library of these that can help us kind of focus to what maybe the good points and the bad points are, and you know, kind of work through a lot of this stuff. So once we kind of get the general information and get the public information, and then just kind of wrap it all together. We talked about that we would, number 2E is to regulate the park, size of park, parking limitations, that kind of thing. You know, you brought that up, Josh. I think that's a good idea, especially for the smaller parks that, you know, the Hidden Beach that have real restricted. You can't, I don't think you could have the same business on Hidden Beach and Crescent as you could on Vets Beach or City Pier Beach. So I think that's a good point
I
that
don't
we
think any
need to.
businesses should be permitted for Crescent or Hidden.
I think since we don't have a huge amount of parks, then I think we have the option to be more specific to each one. And then we have the ability and flexibility to adjust those as time goes on.
Correct. Good. Letter F, 2F is the adoption of rules and regulations. And what this is, and I've found through many of these ordinances, are the use and prohibition of public boat ramps and recreation areas. Say what you can do with a public boat ramp, what you shouldn't be able to do with it. And it boils down to a lot of commercial type watercraft, how long it can sit on a boat ramp. You know, it's got to be limited to a number of minutes if you do allow that. Picking up and dropping off passengers when you do that, soliciting, advertising commercial activities, designating city sites as your physical address, you know, collecting compensation at a city site. You know, that's some of the things. And then to take it a little further, and I'm just kind of rattling off some stuff, they even get into litter. You know, are you picking up your trash? What are you doing? Discharge of waste, you know, fires, food and beverages, any kind of sale or something like that, which relates to smaller vendors and merchandisers. Camping restrictions, you know, it goes into a lot of different things. You know, vegetation disfiguration is some of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Aircraft, you know, I thought this one, aircraft, wasn't probably proper, but right now an aircraft can come up on a beach, which we have a lot of aircraft that land on Lake Jackson. They land on the other side of Lake Jackson. It's pretty cool to watch it, you know. And I think, I'm not saying restrict aircraft, but I think there has to be some that say you can't pull up to City Pier Beach with an aircraft because you can't even pull up there on a boat. So some of the stuff that we don't see are in these ordinances. We really kind of need to look at, I think, because it can happen. That does happen. So
Does the county have an ordinance that regulates the stuff like this at their boat ramps?
I don't know if they do. I didn't see any, so
Are you shaking your head?
Don't believe so.
I didn't see anything. So they're developing an ordinance now for
H.L. Bishop?
H.O. Bishop Park, I think. So I don't know how far they haven't gotten that finished yet. That we've heard of. So
Since that's such a similar kind of deal to what we're talking about, I'd be interested to see what theirs looks like.
and we talked to with to make sure that we're not crossing what they're doing.
Yeah,
You're not
be
crossing what we're
consistent.
doing. Trying to be consistent. So, you know, Lake Jackson's in the city of Sebring. Lake Sebring's in the city of Sebring. Dinner Lake is. Well, you go one lake over, now you're in the county.
Right.
But, you know, you're only a few streets over. So we're trying to be cognizant of what they have and try to be consistent as much as we can. There may be some differences, but so we're kind of working on the end of it. But these are some of the things, if we want to look at putting in an ordinance, we can develop the ordinance with this stuff in it, this information in it, and then we've got to bring it back for approval anyway, so then we can pick it apart. So,
You know, speaking of the aircraft thing, our lake, except for July 4th and a few other things, it doesn't get real crowded on our lake right now. But of course, the aircraft, those clubs, and I love to watch them too. And they come in and land and go over there to Sunset Grill, and they don't pull up on the beach. They just kind of get off and then off of the beach and then get out. But it takes a little bit of room for them to come in and take off. And that could be something in the future we need to look at. Because if there was a lot of boats and all, that could be a real problem.
they pretty much do a flyover before they land.
Yeah.
Watching to make sure.
Let everybody know.
But, you know, to reference Sunset Grill, that's private. This does not regulate private property as far as beaches and commercial properties and that stuff. What,
So we don't
kind
have
of what
to
regulates-
concern ourselves with any
what
of that.
regulates some of this stuff is zoning. So, you know, if it's commercial zoning, there's a lot more they can do than they can in residential, so. But so, like Sunset Grill, if an airplane, if they do beach over there, that's pretty much their option. So,
Mhm.
I mean, you can regulate it, but I don't know that there's a desire to do so. And that-
Right, I don't, I mean,
There's
that's,
a designated seaplane landing strip on that side of the lake, essentially near
I did not know that.
it is, yes,
restaurant.
yeah.
Runs essentially along 27 there.
Well, I know the clubs come in and it is fun to watch them and all.
So that, we'll input a lot of that into that. If you have any other ideas about what we think we need to monitor, gone through some of our ordinance too that we have, that we have to cross-reference a lot of the stuff that we have. There's bits and pieces that they're gonna overlap and they do already.
And you want it consistent.
We want it consistent in that, so.
Who oversees like the watercraft that are out there? Like the police, I mean.
FWC,
What does that mean?
Florida Wildlife Commission.
Oh,
There's a boat out there almost every weekend, so.
oh, that's good.
Don't let your son, who's 10 years old, drive a 18-horse boat, because he's gonna get nailed, so. It was a $10 fine, so. But FWC is responsible, the state waters, so state regulates the water side of it. And there's regulations that, you know, that they have that we can't. So, you know, I mean, that's another issue. We're more on the property side of it than we are this.
Mhm.
There is some leeway on the lakes that we have that have been approved. You know, mooring of boats, some dock issues, and so there is some stuff that overlaps with them, but in general, the FWC for boating, that is, the state regulates that. Now, the city and the fire department have boats that I believe can do some of that,
And the
Right, we
county.
regulate,
in the county.
we have no wake zones.
Right.
Near the beaches and the
Right.
bridge.
Right.
So the county has a vote as well.
So that's, but the main enforcement issue for the lakes itself for boaters is FWC, so.
With this, I was just wondering, with this business, like renting out pontoon boats, do you have to have any kind of special license or anything to?
There's
have
a whole
assistant
statute
ask
that,
me
yeah,
about that.
there's a whole statute that regulates what a basically call delivery service on the water has to have as far as educational, as far as signage, as far as safety issues. I mean, there's a whole slurry of issues that, you know, the age limit that you can, you know, rent these to.
Operate, yeah.
Insurances you have to have, waivers that you have to have, so I mean, it's a pretty,
And you would want compliance with, you know, licensing it, as
Yes.
well as to be a condition of the permit for whatever the business is.
correct. Documentation they have to keep, you know, all sorts of things, so. Item number 3, since we're kind of going down the road of permitting or leasing, or how about fees? We need to establish, we have no fees right now. I think we have if you have a special event, it's $25, but I don't think you ever collect it, do you?
Used to. Not so
Used
much
to,
anymore.
so.
Not so much anymore.
But,
Because these are commercial businesses, I think we need fees that at least just cover our costs for managing the permitting mechanism and whatever enforcement we have to do.
I agree.
So, I mean, yes, a fee, I think it should be small, just enough so that we're, to the point earlier, not subsidizing the cost of this with taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't think that needs to be much, but
if you get into a long-term lease or permit,
it'd be a higher fee, I think.
different story.
Yeah, not, you know, still not, I think, outrageous, but enough to cover the cost to implement the permit and whatever enforcement or, you know, checking up and running down the licensing and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Okay.
So I see on this paper from Jared about, you know, having some kind of fee paid to the city for, you know, going through and having it calculated out what would be fair. You know, that would be just looked at later on down the line.
Well, it would have to be, since what Jared has given us is a tax if we don't, if the business is benefiting over X dollars amount. That becomes a tax to the city, a burden. So that we would have to figure in, how do we implement that to cover those costs? That if it's a longer term lease, how do we cover that?
Right.
You know, we don't want to tax the citizens or burden the citizens for somebody that's got a for-profit operation, and we have to pay the tax on it, so.
One of several things we'll have to look into further to implement this.
So we would just use that to help calculate what our fees would be. Okay.
Pretty much we've gone through the agenda. Does council have anything else after we kind of go through this, and we'll get public input on any of this? What we will do then, we'll get with Central Florida Regional Planning Council, kind of put all the thoughts together, have them put together, help us format an ordinance, a basic ordinance, and then bring it back to City Council, and it'll also be publicly announced. So, you know, it'll have to go through 2 readings.
And at that first point, we can tweak it, so we can talk about it.
Correct. Or second or third, or whatever, however long it takes, so.
Okay.
I think one thing on permit price, though, I don't think that, obviously cover costs too, but I think if you're a larger operation, and not that the city needs to be a profit setter by any means too, but I think that permit price too should fluctuate too based on the value that we're offering too. But if you rented or leased space from any other business on the lake or in a different part, there's probably going to be a high rental cost and lease cost of that. Not that we need to be competitive with local market, but I don't think it should be the cheapest that we can either. So somewhere in between.
Okay.
Just my 2 cents.
Okay. You know, zoning was brought up. Is there any interest in looking at changing any zoning at this time?
I don't think there's any need to.
Okay.
In which regards then? Like changing it from public? Or what do you mean?
Well, changing, if there's a zoning from residential to commercial, or, you know, different zoning issues that we have out there, so. And uses in different zones.
Bob, what's your feeling on that?
I don't think we need to address that yet.
We've got a housekeeping issue to deal with, and that's
Yeah.
that parcel of Veterans
Right.
Beach.
Those
Which is currently zoned R1A that the city owns. It needs to be rezoned to public.
Do you? Yeah. Okay.
Can we put that in with all this other stuff?
For the benefit of the public, that there's a special zoning category for publicly owned property, and so the city has owned that for a number of years, and it should be rezoned to the correct zoning category for it.
Public use, PU. So. Any other?
And for the public benefit, it was a parcel that was privately owned. It was an R1A zoned parcel. The house used to belong to it. The city purchased that property for future expansion of Veterans Beach Park. So, just for everybody's benefit. That was back in 2006, I believe.
And this probably wouldn't happen too, but can we just include 2 vacant land that the property owns? And not being able to use that or going through the same process?
We can, yeah, I mean, that's something we can take a look at on that, so.
They do, okay.
We can kind of identify that too, so we know what we're talking about. Any other comments you'd all like to make, or questions? What's going on, so. The public, you can open this up to the public. No, we ask you to keep it short as possible. We'll give you the time that you need. But if you get long-winded, you're gonna have to deal with Ralph, so. Yes, sir. Come up to the microphone and give us your name, where you live, and then you have approximately 3 minutes, so. Okay.
My name is William Hollinger. I live at 2002 Beach Drive. Would your report that you did the research for other parks be available to have a copy to be read here at City Hall to understand more of what other people have done?
What we'll do is, I've got notes and a whole bunch of stuff here. We're going to organize that into more of an ordinance and then give that to everybody. The public
Okay.
will have access to that, so when the meeting that it comes back to, you can get an advanced copy of that.
Okay.
It'll be a little more understanding, because it'll be, my notes are kind of all over the place.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll organize that for you. Thank you. Yes, sir. That's all right.
Good evening.
Phil Gilroy. I live on 1327 Chloe Terrace, across the street from Lake Jackson. In relation, talking about this boat business that's going on next to Veterans Beach, I rented one of those little boats in May for my daughter's birthday. That was her present. We had a great time. Everything was great. He's got 3 Craig Cats, 1 pontoon boat, and I think 3 tubes with umbrellas on, no motor. He could accommodate parking, if you're worried about Veterans Beach parking, on his property for his customers, easily. And they're not all rented all the time. I mean, there could be 2 sitting there and 1 out. Maybe the pontoon boat's out. I go by it all the time because I pass his house going home. Wasn't he issued permits to?
No, sir.
Not from the city.
No, sir.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And not to get too deep into the weeds on that one, but in that R1A zoning, there's restrictions on parking, there's restrictions on how to handle businesses, so there's a lot of other restrictions that affect him, or
Okay.
them, I should say, so.
Which means he has to do those things out of Veterans Beach to be in compliance legally, correct? Right.
Pretty much.
And I'm not sure of this 100%. He could verify it. When the food trucks came, when he had his grand opening, I believe he paid for that. So people were getting free food. If that's what he did, I know he ain't doing that no more. That was a one-time thing. So that's not going to happen again.
Okay,
And that's all I got to say.
okay, thank you, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Danny Copeland. Not a real great speaker, but I feel strongly about
Can you
this.
give us your address, please?
Pardon me?
Your address, please?
I live at 2759 Pinewood Boulevard, right there off Lake Jackson. We have lake access. You have addressed a lot of issues that are real important. I've got 41 years using that ramp. I work for Highlands County, and 21 years I've used an airboat to take care of these lakes that you are talking about. I have a lot of knowledge when it comes to this. I've never seen people more courteous, more kind than this operation that's going on that is getting such a hard time. And I want you to understand, these people are good people. When you had your jet ski races down there, I'm sure there was a fee in charge of that. When you have your bass boat tournaments, 21 boats were there Saturday, charging a fee to be on that lake. So it's no different, in my opinion, for that from the surfboard racing. We all love this stuff. We live on the lake. I put on events out there where 45 boats came. We have an association called Scream and Fly that we're a fast boat association. We brought them out to Sunset Beach Grill and Sunset Beach Motel before it turned into a dive, and we had a great time. I encourage you to get behind this.
So.
Pardon me?
I said, don't condone a business here.
All right, if you want some crack, you can go there. But anyway, it's
I
bad.
ask you to sit down at that key stop. So.
It's real bad. It's real bad over there, and the law enforcement knows it. But I'm just going to say, you have to get behind these people. They're doing a great thing. When you had the jet ski races there, this family took and cooked out of their own pocket, just like they did for this grand opening, when it had nothing to do with the business, enough tacos to feed the families and the crews for free, because they're good people. They're just trying. Lenard, I know you don't care for this, but buddy, let me tell you, it's a good thing. People come there with church groups and everything, and they rent a pontoon boat. The impact to the ramp is zero. They don't even put their trailer there. I don't know if you realize this. One pontoon boat trailer, their trailers go back to their house
They are literally no impact. You want impact? Go down there on a Saturday, which I'm there every weekend, because we live right there. We have a pontoon and 2 jet skis, and watch what's going on that's a disarray, where the ramp is being used for a race course, in and out of the buoys with Sea-Doos and everything, and I own a Sea-Doo. And I watch, and I work with FWC. I'm at these ramps every day. Need to get behind these people instead of giving them, and as far as the lease goes, check on the insurance sometime on what it costs to insure a pontoon boat and a couple little creek cats, no jet skis, just those creek cats, to put them out there on the water. They're not making any money. So whatever you charge them, if you have to rent them a little piece of property, be fair. For goodness sake, be fair. Because they're not making any. I mean, I have a whole bunch of stuff. I know I only got 3 minutes. I'm not going to talk about all this stuff. But, you know, people run businesses out of their houses. I don't see them doing businesses out of their house. Leonard, don't you have a business at your house?
I have an office.
Okay, don't people come there and show up?
No.
Never. Your employees never show up to your
My
house?
employees do. but
Okay,
they
that's
come
kind of the same thing. But at any rate, you know, I go there, have coffee on Saturday morning, every Saturday morning, and every Sunday morning before church. And I watch what goes on. And I watch a couple working very hard to not impact that ramp at all. Put 21 truck and trailers there with bass boats. That's an impact. No trailer there. They float a boat over and one car parks and gets into a boat and drives away. It's not a lot. It's a little bit of traffic. Get behind these people. I mean, that's all I can say to you is I have a lot of experience at the ramp. Been there 41 years. My daughter learned to swim at Crescent Beach 37 years ago. We are on that water every weekend. I encourage you to get behind them.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
My name is David Burgett. I live at 421 Sassafras, which is basically right behind the tower. My wife and I go to that beach every single morning. I mean, every morning, unless it's downpouring rain. We also think they're doing a great job. There is no disruption on that beach at all due to them. How many people in this room were there during Labor Day? How many people? Let me tell you something. I went to Labor Day. We were there first thing in the morning. Both handicap spots was somebody with a barbecue grill and a truck that had music so loud you could barely hear. Sebring Police, my father's an ex-policeman. I have all the respect in the world for the police. Sat right there for about 30 minutes, then just drove off. That truck sat, we had no handicap spacing. If you can't enforce 2 handicap spaces, how are you going to enforce what you're all talking about? You all have great ideas. I love listening to your opinion. You know, Hidden Beach, I get all those beaches. Veterans Beach, you know, what are you going to do with an ice cream truck that we saw that comes up there and parks? You guys, you just want to enforce a lot of laws, but I don't know how you're going to enforce them when the city of Sebring Police Department, we have a school zone that runs up and down. You come down Highland Park, you force our children to cross the street for a bus stop. There's not even a cross space for them, yet you make them. I've lived here for many, many years. I can't once remember seeing a speed trap down there. Let's start enforcing. Have you guys ever walked down there? My wife and I do it. I have friends in this room that walk. Kelly, I mean, these people fly down this road. I always see the Sebring policemen parked in the parking lot across, and I never realized. So that house right there, that belongs to the city? That's right there under the water? Okay, I never realized that. We see them there all the time. Can they just maybe once a week, especially during the school season, pick up a radar gun and start zapping these freaking people? I mean, you guys got to see it. And I'm surprised nobody here was at Veterans Park during Labor Day, because you would have been. And let me tell you what, do you guys all know where Sunrise is? I'm sorry, Sassafras? Okay, we're right behind the tower. Okay, it's a very small little park, goes into the cul-de-sac. We can hear the music so loud from our house. I can only imagine what these guys do during the holidays, especially. There's no enforcement and noise whatsoever. So before you start implying and putting more rules and more regulations, you got to figure out who's going to enforce them and start enforcing what I'm assuming. Is there a noise ordinance down there, like at Veterans Park?
There is. The courts have found that noise ordinances are unconstitutional.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. I'll remember that. I'll take my jam box down there next weekend. How about the handicap spots? Is there an ordinance on who's allowed to park in handicap?
There are state regulations on handicap parking, yes, sir.
So are you allowed to put a barbecue grill in there and cook all day long during Labor Day? Why did the Sebring police come up and not do anything?
I don't mean
And
to-
I'm done. But like I say, before you start pushing in more rules and regulations and hurting people that are doing good for this community, how are you going to enforce them?
This is a workshop to discuss the use of Lake Jackson and public parks by commercial. I appreciate your comments, and those have to come up, but I don't want this to get off on a tangent. We're not here bashing anybody. We're trying to figure out how we manage this thing and move forward. And there's a lot more involved in that than just saying, hey, let everybody do what they want. I think what happens is you get out of hand, and that's what happens. When there's enforcement that shows up and we can do this, and we can move forward on it. So, but please restrict your comments to what this is at hand. So,
But also, Mr. Burkhead, please come back and present those complaints to the regular city council.
you can come back to a meeting, and you get 3 minutes to say whatever you want. So, which is good information. I'm not saying that's. I don't want to. Nobody should be in a handicap unless you're handicapped, unless it was a one-legged guy cooking brats or something. But no, that's good information, and to come back to a regular city council meeting where you if you're not on the agenda, you have 3 minutes to say what you've seen, and we appreciate that when you come here because it helps, and the police department, the police chief is pretty much on it all the time, but he can't be in 100 places at one time. So, and but I do appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
And come back.
We will be getting involved.
Okay, good.
I want everybody to realize I'm not against business. I think it's a good idea. I just want to be sure that the citizens can still use their parks without a hassle. That's all I'm after.
Can I mention one other thing too? I've seen some stuff leading up to this meeting suggesting that we're trying to shut a business down. And that's the furthest from the case.
No,
that
I'm
could be
not trying to
possible.
shut it down. I just want to make sure
Right.
that our citizens can still use the park and not be said, you can't.
What I'm trying to say before we get a bunch more comments, I'm not trying to shut down anyone's business.
No.
We're not trying to shut it down in any way, shape, or form. Just want to regulate what's going on and make sure that it's fair for any other businesses and the public who use the park. It's as simple as that to me.
Ralph Flores, 4290 Lakeview Drive, a neighbor. When I bought property here in Sebring, Lake Jackson, one of the things that I've noticed is, unless I had a boat, I could just sit there as a tourist and look at the water. I mean, I could do that anywhere in the world. The idea was getting to get something. At that time, when I first started coming to your meetings 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I mentioned that to you, and they said it was a good idea to have something like that on Lake Jackson. Some boat rentals or something where tourists can come in and enjoy the lake. Right now, tourists can come in and just look at the lake. Now that we have the boat rentals, they can enjoy the lake too. It is, I think it's something that we need there. Maybe there's some kind of rules or something, but we need this business on Lake Jackson. I don't care what we have to do to do it, but we need to have this business on Lake Jackson.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I worked in a school. I raised my hand for everything, right? My name is Sam Johnson. I'm neighbor, also Kellyanne and Mike's. I have to agree with Mr. Copeland and everybody else, all the comments that are made. But my question is this, and Mr. Carlisle, thanks for what you had said about, parking and public access and all that stuff. It appears that Veterans Beach is truly the only area on the lake that is accessible by the taxpayers.
It is.
Can't get to Hidden Beach, can't get to Crescent Beach, and it's questionable about the pier. So if you're all having this meeting about businesses getting on the lake and stuff like that, that are really getting operated out of a private home, you need to ask yourself the true question, because a lot of it is about parking. What access does the public have to our beaches? Veterans is the only one, and that's why it's always so crowded.
Boat access.
any access.
Well,
Can you park my car down by a veteran or by a hidden?
By
How
City
about-
Pier.
City Pier you can.
Yeah, but is there a boat ramp there?
No, that's what I'm saying,
There's one
not-
boat
But-
ramp.
And that's a veterans.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying? The only beach that has true public access is veterans. Even the city is not adequate. Put a boat ramp and maybe you got it there. Okay, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but that seems to be the issue. The only beach that has
Well,
true
and
public
that's-
access.
That's what we're trying to establish, is how do we regulate that business? How do we allow a business to operate on public, not just the boat ramp, but all public parks and that? That's kind of what we're trying to establish here. Now, there's other issues that come into play, and there's zoning issues about running businesses in R1A zoning.
Right. Let me
which
ask
is-
you this.
can, yes, ma'am.
Do you think more of the busyness at veterans would go to hidden if they're swimming and doing all that, if they could park there? Or maybe Crescent? Or even at the pier here, if they could swim or get their boat there? I'm saying, let's share the wealth instead of all funneling it to veterans. Let's look at getting some parking and some boat ramps at other places.
Hidden and Crescent are landlocked, basically.
We bought the women's
City
center.
piers, pardon?
We purchased the women's center, right?
Exactly.
And the property to the south.
But you see what I'm saying? If we're forward thinking, let's forward think about getting parking and access to those other beaches. Or maybe formulating a new beach, which I know has got a whole nother state headaches,
You're
over
on
there
that
by the
committee. You're on
Pizza
that
Hut.
committee, how does that sound?
Sign me up. No, I am done with public service. I mean, another beach out by 27 by the Pizza Hut, to me, would make so much sense. I know what the hurdles are, I know what the headaches are, but that would make so much more sense.
There used to be a
3
beach,
minutes are up.
there used to be a beach all along
There used to be a
27.
beach from the bridge to Hammock Road.
I
When I was
know.
a kid, it was one big white beach,
know.
picnic tables, everything.
Yeah, I remember your times because I knew about that, and that's where I want to be. That, to me, those were the, my 3 minutes are up, but those were the times.
Thank you.
Let's get the other
Thank you for your
beaches.
comments.
What happened to that beach, Leonard?
The 27 came into play.
Yeah, they
They
pulled all the
widened
sand
it,
up
Yeah.
and made the 27.
and that's all state property areas.
It was supposed to have been put back, but I think the environmentalists got involved.
I do see a lot of boats, when I go up down.
Yeah, they,
27.
they,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Keith Wilson, 745 Lamont Drive, Sebring. I'm curious, who controls the bird scooters? They sit all around on city property. How are they regulated?
The
They
what?
take the bird scooters that you see all over
Oh,
town, all the
oh,
parks,
yeah.
down
When
the
that,
circle.
when that business came to fruition, they came to city council and got a use permit for that business.
Okay.
So, and it was designated where they could put now, where they're dropped off, I can't tell you what happens there. They're
Right.
supposed to pick them up on a daily basis.
But I know from experience that they stay on the public parks.
Correct.
And I see families park their vehicles in those areas,
Right.
take the bird scooters and go elsewhere, same
Correct.
as on the circle and everywhere else. There's no regulation to that, which there are tons more of those vehicles on the roads than you see for this boat
But
rental service.
that business, they came to city council and got approval for that.
Right, and that's what
business.
we're in the process of doing. So how that situation was addressed, if our concern is, flooding Veterans Beach with vehicles parking there and prohibiting, citizens, which the citizens are using this service more than probably anyone from out of town, I would say. How did we regulate that, or is there any regulation for that? They're dropped off wherever they want to be dropped off.
Correct.
And then people park, take up space to go ride that elsewhere. I understand they came to City County Council, and I think that's what everyone here is trying to do. Maybe look at that model and see how that has really affected parking or anything. It hasn't, to my knowledge. I mean, you see them everywhere, and they're picked up all over town. So I think if you look at that model, a point-of-sale system, you don't have to accept payment on public property. They could set up the same point-of-sale system on their watercraft, and purchase would be made that way. I just don't see a difference in it taking up physical space as far as parking and overflowing, a public beach. That's it.
Thank you. Any further comments on the use of Lake Jackson in public parks by commercial businesses? Mr. Lawrence.
I'm Charlie Lawrence. I live at 3720 Lakeview Drive. And I think it's a great thing that this guy has written these boats out. And I think that we need to figure out how to encourage that instead of how to stop them. I don't understand some of the differences. I called up Lake June Pontoon Boat Rentals before he was there. They dropped off a pontoon boat for me at Veterans Beach, and I rented it for 2 days. They came and picked it back up. So him running his business out of his quote-unquote house, I don't understand the difference if he does business at Veterans Beach just like Lake June Pontoon Boat does, or other businesses. And also, I'll get into the food trucks a little bit, but and the permitting process with the food trucks, I think it's great. I do think there needs to be a limit, but that's a public service. A lot of us go down to Veterans Beach and we would like to get something to eat. If we're hanging out there, we didn't want to bring the barbecue grill and all that other stuff. So I do think it's a public service, just like the boat rentals is. But in order for him to be able to rent a boat, quote unquote, I guess, out of his house, he drops it off at Veterans Beach. Somebody picks it up, they pay him, and then when they're done, they come and get it. So I'm not sure where he's violating anything. Is it that he's got too many boats on his residential property? And if so, I think you're allowed 2 boats and a couple jet skis or something. Or if he parks them off-site somewhere, can he still bring them to Veterans Beach and rent them? There's other places that do that. Lake June Pontoon is one of the ones that I'm familiar with. I know there's someone else that also rents jet skis, and they'll drop them off at Veterans. You pick them up, you have a good time, you come back 4 hours later, they pick them back up. So what's the difference between him doing it just because he's next door and that's where the boats are parked, or the boat? I think he only has one boat, one pontoon boat. So is he in violation of something there?
Question is, there's commercial activity going on in the parks, and is that something that council wishes to regulate on a going forward basis?
Okay.
And there's probably lots of businesses we don't know anything about that are using that park or perhaps other parks for differing things, and sort of the time is right to start looking at whether or not there should be regulation.
Okay. So in other words, the other people are kind of, there is no regulation to prevent them from doing it, or we're looking at establishing a regulation?
The latter.
Okay, so right now there's not a regulation against it?
Correct.
Okay. But I do think, you know, we're always looking at things for young people to do around here. And you know what? I've been to a lot of different communities. Down in Coconut Grove, they rent sailboats down there off a public pier. I think it's great. Daytona Beach, they rent lawn chairs, you know, and they have a bid every year as to who can do it, and they have an exclusive right. Whoever gets the high bid to give to the city, they get the exclusive right to go out there and rent beach chairs and or food trucks and stuff. And that might be a way to figure out how to make the most money for the city in a sense, if you get a lot of demand. But we need something for the young people to do, you know, paddle boards out there, you know, pontoon boat, whatever, you know. So I would like to encourage you guys to encourage these businesses and figure out a way to make it happen instead of just shutting them down with regulations.
Well, we're not shutting, Charlie, you sat on the council, so you don't understand what pressure we're under. We have to, we were put on the council, especially the ones that have the vote. Thank God I don't have to vote on this, but, you know, but I do have an opinion. But we were, part of your oath to taking office was to abide by the rules of the city of Sebring and enforce them. When they started that business, they were in violation of 5 ordinances and a zoning. And that's what we're trying to see how we can work around that. But right now, you say they've got 1 boat and 2 things. Well, you want to know what the definition, and you said on the council.
Yep.
I don't think you were here when this was done, but you want to know what the definition of a boat is in our ordinances?
Go ahead.
Boat means any man-made item which floats and is designed to be propelled by oars, paddles, sail, motorized power, or by any other means, and includes personal watercraft. So your floating docks are technically, by our ordinances, a boat. Your paddle boards are technically a boat. Those cat craft or whatever that's called, those are boats. So how many of these do they have?
Yeah, well, they
I mean,
do
you've
have,
got-
in that case.
You know,
they
there's
have
been
one-
9 of them out there that I've seen as far as paddle boards. But that's the issue that the city council has to deal with, is how do we enforce our ordinances, but also how do we work through them to make sure if the business model's great. I think it's very well used. I see them flying all over the lake. But this is what, the problem that the city council has at this time is that business technically they were denied a conditional use permit to run that business, but it's still running. So now we have to figure out how do we work through this? And part of that is getting this ordinance put together and then addressing the other issues that we have, so.
I know it's not an easy thing to do all the time and whatnot, but again, I just want to encourage you to encourage businesses here and figure out a way to make it happen, a way to say yes instead of a way to say no. So, and again, considering everybody, the neighbors and all that stuff, but it is a big benefit for the citizens, and myself included in this, to be able to go down and rent a boat somewhere. Because, you know, we may not want to buy a boat, or I may not want one sitting out there to use 3 times a year. So somehow we need to figure out how to make it happen. So, thank you.
Any other comments? If not, council.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to respond to, I'm Deborah, and we live,
Deborah,
Ramsdale, and we live just beyond the park as well, in
can you pull that microphone down?
Brunners Modular Home Park, or retirement community. But it's not just for the young, us old people like it too. A bunch of us 70-year-olds rented it one day. And what was nice is my friend has had a stroke, and I broke my foot, so he was able to pull up to the dock and let us get on because neither one of us could maneuver water. So it's not just for the young, it's for us old people too.
All right, no further comments, I'll turn it over to you.
You want to close?
Yep.
Close.
Thank you for coming.